Speaking, so we might get started given we are recording the session today. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bethany Devonish, and I have the privilege of serving as the Commissioned Research Project Manager at the National Disability Research Partnership. My pronouns are she, her, and I am joining you from the lands of the Bunurong people. I am a white woman in my 40s with medium length brownish blondish hair that is partly clipped back, and I'm wearing a black top. So I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting today. We know we are on First Nations land, and we respect the First Nations people from this land. On this land, we live, work, play, swim, and dream together. First Nations people have lived here for many, many years, and now we all share this land. We honour and respect all First Nations people and elders. And I also want to show my respect to all First Nations people who are joining us, and we recognise the important contributions they make to our communities and to our work together in the disability sector. So please feel free to acknowledge in the chat the lands you are joining from today. Before we begin, I just want to mention that today's session is being run in a Zoom meeting format, so not a webinar. This means you may see other participants on your screen, and you have the option to adjust your view settings to suit your preferences. If you'd like to change your view or pin a speaker, here's how. You can access gallery view versus speaker view. So you click on the view button in the top right corner of your screen to switch between the speaker view, which highlights the active speaker, which today will be mostly myself, and the gallery view, which shows multiple participants at once. You can also, if you want to keep a particular speaker or the Auslan interpreter on your screen, hover over their video, click the three dots, which is more, and select Pin Video. If you need any help adjusting your settings, feel free to ask in the chat and our team will assist you. So the lovely Sue Tape is here. As part of the NDRP's commitment to role modelling best practices in accessibility and inclusion, the NDRP is working to embed accessible ways of working in everything we do, including sessions like this. So please also note that this session is being recorded and it will be available on our website for others to access and for you to be able to share with your colleagues. So we have live captions available for this session. You can turn them on or off by selecting the CC or live transcript button in your Zoom toolbar at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to use the chat to share your thoughts or ask questions. Please be mindful of others in the chat. And if you today want to ask a question anonymously, send your message directly to Sue Tape, and she will then paste that into the shared chat on your behalf, obviously without your name. For breaks, we're going to have a 10-minute break during the session. If you need to step away at any time, please feel free to do so. And if you need additional assistance during the session, you can privately message Sue Tape from the NDRP in the chat. She's here to help. So let me briefly take you through the structure of today's session. First, we'll introduce the National Disability Research Partnership, highlight our strategic agenda and guiding principles, and emphasise our commitment to research by and with people with disability. We'll also explain the Commissioned Research Project and outline the 3 opportunities that will be funded. Then we will spend roughly 30 minutes talking through the funding guidelines, including the expected outcomes, the purpose of possible projects, and also things like what should be covered in a project budget. I will also explain who you might partner with, what is an administering organisation, and who should be on the research team. We will discuss the assessment criterion and what we are looking for in proposals. So following that, we'll take a short break, which will give you some time to reflect and prepare any questions that you may want to ask. After the break, we'll respond to questions that attendees have already submitted prior to this event. And if there's time, we'll then also respond to additional questions you may still have. We'll wrap up with key takeaways, and a link to the post-session evaluation survey will also be shared. We'd really appreciate your feedback. It helps us to continue to improve how we engage with you all. So now let's delve into the National Disability Research Partnership, what drives our work, and how it connects to the commissioned research project. I'll cover NDRP's strategic agenda, our guiding principles, and the critical role of research by and with people with disability. I'll also explain how the commissioned research links to our broader efforts to strengthen research readiness in this space. So let's start with the NDRP's strategic agenda. At its core, the NDRP exists to advance high-quality, impactful research that addresses the priorities of people with disability, their families, and their communities. So we do this by funding research that is informed by the NDRP research agenda, by enabling inclusion and participation. So research should promote full inclusion and meaningful participation across all aspects of life. By building capacity for inclusive research, this means not just conducting research about people with disability, but empowering people with disability to lead and co-create that research. And by driving evidence into action, we are committed to ensuring research outcomes inform policies, practices, and systems that deliver real-world benefits. These objectives are critical because they align with broader national priorities, including Australia's disability strategy, which sets out a vision for an inclusive society where people with disability are engaged, supported, and valued. Our work is shaped by guiding principles that reflect our commitment to collaboration, equity, and inclusion. These principles are things like research by and with people with disability. We aim to shift the paradigm. People with disability aren't just participants in research. They are leaders, co-creators, and decision makers throughout the process. Collaboration across sectors. We foster partnerships between researchers, organisations, government, and people with disability to ensure the work is both inclusive and impactful. And equity and justice. Our projects are designed to challenge systemic barriers and promote fairness across systems, recognising the intersectional nature of disability experiences. Finally, knowledge translation. We prioritise translating research findings into actionable outcomes, whether that's influencing policy, improving services, or changing community attitudes. Our research agenda includes 12 key areas which were directly developed from the priorities of people with disability. The commissioned researcher focuses on one of these key areas, the transition of young people with disability from education to employment in the And so that's the focus within the commissioned research. So before we get into talking about the focus for the funding round, I wanted to quickly highlight these key dates on the slide. So applications have already opened and they will close on the 21st of November. Funding decisions will be communicated by early Feb at the latest, but if we can get that out earlier, of course we will. And contract execution needs to occur really quickly. This is an important point to highlight because there is absolutely no space at all, no wriggle room for that project completion date to move. Projects must be completed in April 2027. So if there's delays in the contract's execution, that will impact the time you have to complete the project. And the reason I'm highlighting this is, I guess, just to suggest really carefully reviewing the funding guidelines, particularly in reference to requirements around shared IP across all of your research team, so including partner organisations. Things like the NDRP and the Commonwealth being granted publishing rights. And also there is an expectation that the 3 successful teams will be, attending meetings together and therefore they will be sharing some information with each other. Those 3 successful teams will be. The funding guidelines, they're available on our website and we do have plain language and Auslan versions of those as well. The funding guidelines and assessment criterion are what you should focus on when completing your application. And this is a really important point before we sort of get into some of the detail, because while we aim today to cover some helpful information in our session, we're not able to cover the breadth and the detail that those guidelines and the assessment criterion do. So do go back to that detail anytime you're sort of unsure of how to proceed. So let's take a quick look at what this funding round is all about. We're funding 3 disability-led research projects up to $190,000 for each of those 3 projects. And these are to explore how systems and organisations can better support young NDIS participants, so aged 15 to 25, to move from education and training into meaningful careers. This round is about turning existing evidence into action. We're not looking for new programs or interventions. We're looking for projects that build on what we already know, focus on implementation and systems change, and are led by people with disability. We've created 3 opportunities. Opportunity 1 is the broad NDIS employment assistance. So that's will include participants such as autistic young people or young people with intellectual disability. Opportunity 2 will focused on First Nations young people with disability. And opportunity 3 will focus on young people with complex support or communication needs. Each project should explore what helps or hinders providers from delivering best practice, how young people make informed choices about employment supports, and how geography, exclusion, or disadvantage shapes their outcomes. How we arrived at this topic and focus is important background for those considering applying. Part of the NDRP's role in commissioning this research was to narrow the research focus so that it aligns closely with the priorities of people with disability. We knew it was essential to start with what people with disability had already said, but we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We wanted to build on the knowledge, experiences, and insights that people with disability had already provided. So we began by reviewing publicly available stories, submissions, and reports, which were shared by people with disability, their families, and their representative organisations. These voices painted a clear picture. Young people with disability need support that is coordinated, person-centred, and built around their goals. From this review, 8 key themes emerged. Things like attitudes and expectations, access to work experience, education and training, employment supports, intersectionality, and the challenge of navigating fragmented systems, including across states and across the Commonwealth, at the Commonwealth level as well. These themes helped us to understand the broader landscape and the barriers young people face when transitioning from school to work from their perspective. Next, we met with disability representative organisations to ask what kind of research could really make a difference. Their feedback was clear and strategic. They told us the research must be practical, leading to real, actionable outcomes within current systems and funding. It must be inclusive, especially of people who are often left out, like those with complex support needs, intellectual disability, or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disability. And it must be co-designed with people with direct lived experience involved in leadership and in decision-making. So we then held a roundtable with researchers, government representatives, and advocacy groups. Together, we explored what's already known and what still needs to happen. One message came through strongly. There has been a lot of trialling of different transition programs, and so we know a lot about what works. But that knowledge isn't always being used in practice. So what is particularly needed is research that looks at the bigger picture, meaning research that looks at how what works can be built into government policy and other related systems. So we asked ourselves, which system or service could we focus on to make the biggest difference? We looked for an area that responded directly to what young people had told us, connected with other systems like education and employment, and had the potential for broader impact beyond their system itself. That's how we landed on NDIS capacity building employment supports. These supports help young people move from education or training into work. They offer career advice, skill building, and work experience. And service providers are encouraged to use best practice. By focusing on this area, we can explore how providers decide to use best practice, how young people decide to access these supports, and therefore how we can improve the system, not just for NDIS participants, but also starting to think about what the project findings might mean across educational training and employment, policy and practice, industry. Importantly, as you can see from the topic, the Commission's research is designed to operate at a systems and policy level. It's not just about individual experiences or individual transition programs. It's about understanding how systems work or don't, and how we can make them better. This means that we are looking for experienced research teams who can bring about large-scale structural and policy level changes, creating systemic impact. This is a really important point, as the experience and strength of the team will be assessed, and teams that do not have the policy or research experience that this project will require will not be competitive. Having said that, as I'll highlight later, we are assessing the team as a whole. So you can have less experience and be involved in a team, provided that across the whole team, you're able to deliver what the project is looking for. So we've created the 3 research opportunities so that we can make sure that there is a focus on groups who often miss out on current supports. And we've also made sure that people with disability will be leading and shaping the work. The process that we used, grounded in lived experience, shaped by advocacy, and focused on practical change, is what gives the project its strength. It's about making sure that what we already know gets used and that the systems young people rely on actually support their goals. In summary, the NDRP strategic agenda, guiding principles, and our focus on research by and with people with disability are the driving forces behind everything we do. The commissioned research is a critical step toward building an inclusive, impactful research ecosystem that addresses the priorities of people with disability. So moving forward, I've already spoken about our strategic agenda and our guiding principles and how we arrived at this topic through collaboration with people with disability, DROs, and researchers. And so now what I will walk you through is what we're looking for in applications. So the purpose of these projects is to generate policy relevant insights. So as mentioned earlier, not to trial interventions or to develop resources, but to understand and map the systemic and organisational factors that shape access to and use of NDIS employment supports. Each project will be funded for up to $190,000, excluding GST, for over 12 months, starting in March 2026. Your budget can include salaries, travel, accessibility costs, so Auslan, Easy English, costs for inclusive participation and co-design, training costs, and it should avoid overheads or capital purchases. What we're really looking for is budgets that support inclusive, disability-led research, and we do ask for clear justification for each item. And yeah, you can see a little bit more there around what cannot be included in your project and the guidelines go into some specifics. So each opportunity focuses on a different group. You can only apply for one opportunity. So think carefully about which aligns best with your team's experience. As mentioned earlier, each project should explore barriers or enablers for providers to deliver best practice, how young people make informed choices about employment supports, the impact of geography, school exclusion, justice system involvement, socioeconomic disadvantage, or other factors that may have different effects on different young people. Projects must be disability-led, and findings should inform policy and systems change, not just within the NDIS, we would be expecting to see implications for other systems such as education, health, and employment. Strong applications will focus on how we can make sure what works is embedded in systems. We'll centre people who face the greatest barriers. And we'll examine structural factors like funding, culture, and accountability. We're not looking for projects that retest what works or that provide resource or training development or that focus on individual solutions and ignore the systemic barriers. We expect projects to be collaborative, involving at least 2 organisations. These can be community-led or university-led. I've indicated the minimum required research team members in red, in a red outline on the slide. So these are the administering organisation, which will submit the application and will manage the funding agreement. The contact person, who must be from the administering organisation and will be the key communication liaison with NDRP. And the partner organisation, who is formally and actively involved in leadership of the project and has individuals named on the application as research team members. So the research team, to be really clear, includes all named applicants. In comparison, if there are others who will be involved in the project but are not going to be listed as applicants, they should be described as project team members. Your research team must include people with disability in real leadership roles, especially those that have lived experience relevant to the opportunity. And for opportunity 2, obviously, we would also be looking for First Nations leadership there. Researchers skilled in inclusive disability research is another component we would expect to see in the research team, as well as policy experts who know how government works. We encourage you to describe team roles in non-traditional ways. So highlighting lived experience, shared leadership, and equitable governance. Applications will be assessed against 5 criteria, which I will now talk you through briefly. The first is team capacity and capability. It'll be assessed, it'll be 25% of the overall score. And it looks, well, with that, what we're looking for are teams who have the right mix of lived experience, especially people with relevant lived experience in leadership roles, policy expertise, so people who know how government uses research to make decisions, and inclusive research skills, people who know how to do research that's safe, accessible, and collaborative. If considering applying, it is important to assess as a team whether your team covers the experience as a whole that this research requires. As touched on earlier, if you don't feel your team covers the experience required, then identify where those gaps are and consider who you could invite to your research team to address those gaps. Some key questions you can ask yourselves when responding to criterion 1 include, can we show how our work has influenced policy before? Are we paying people with lived experience fairly? And have we clearly described each person's role and why they're the right fit? So the next criterion is inclusive governance and engagement, and that's worth 15% of your overall, your overall application score. This is about how you share power and decision-making across your team. Strong applications will show that everyone has a voice in leadership and governance. Intellectual property is shared fairly. There are clear plans to support safety, well-being, and career development. And people with lived experience are leading key decisions, not just consulted. Essentially, avoid tokenism and make sure your governance structure reflects real collaboration. The next criterion is the project methods, which is worth 25%. And this is about how you'll do the research. We're looking for methods that are inclusive, trauma-informed, and culturally safe. For co-design and co-production, that's meaningful, not just mentioned. We're looking for a clear link between your methods and the research questions and your outputs or your impact, in another way of framing it. And we're looking for plans to keep people safe and to make participation accessible. Also think about how geography, exclusion, or disadvantage might shape your approach when writing your methods. So the third criterion is strategic alignment and impact, worth 25%. This is about whether your project will lead to real change. Strong applications will build on what's already known, not duplicate it. We'll focus on system-level change, not on individual programs. We'll show how findings will be shared in ways that are useful to government, services, and communities. And we'll include a plan for how your insights will influence policy. This is a really key area, making sure that your proposal shows how it connects to the bigger picture. And finally, the last criterion is overall value and risk, which has a 10% weighting. And this is about whether your project is a good investment. You'll need to show a realistic budget and timeline. You'll outline clear deliverables and a plan to manage risks like ethics delays or staffing changes. We want to see that your project's achievable and that you've thought through the practicalities. So these 5 criterion are scored using a matrix, and reviewers on our independent review panels will include people with disability, researchers, and policymakers. So hopefully from this, you can see some of the key ideas around what makes for a competitive application. For example, a competitive application would have a team that is disability-led, where you all share power and work together. The project would have a clear pathway to influence policy. It would build on what already works, and accessibility and inclusion would be considered in every aspect of the project, from the processes used to the outputs. It would avoid red flags like tokenistic disability leadership, vague partnerships, methods that overlook trauma or accessibility, or another red flag would be describing systems rather than showing how your project can transform systems. So thank you all for listening along so far. We'll have a 10-minute screen break now, give you a chance to stretch, refresh, and reset before our next question, and to just jot down any questions you may have. So when we return, we'll have an open forum for questions where I will address some of the questions submitted before the session. And if there is time, they'll obviously take some live questions from the audience as well. So yeah, please feel free to use this time to jot down any questions you might like to ask, and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes at 12:50.
Sue speaking. We just need to wait for the interpreters, and you're also on silent, Bethany.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. We're now moving into the open forum for questions. In this session, we will answer the pre-submitted questions first to provide clarity and insights, and I think there'll be time afterwards. So at that stage, we are open for further questions from those of you who are attending today. So thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance. These questions help us make sure that we're addressing the areas that matter most to you. So the first question I'm going to respond to, I've actually collapsed a few together because the answer will respond to a few at the same time. So these questions were, is the project's primary objective to identify current practices or lack thereof in the first instance that inhibit employment opportunities, and then to provide a set of recommendations to overcome this? And linked to that question was just noting that given pilots and suggestions of best practice models cannot be used, where is the foundations for recommendations? And then a similar question that was asked separately was, we offer a program that supports young people with disability to transition to employment. Can we submit a proposal that focuses on this program? So yeah, in response to those questions, what we learned through our consultation process is that there is already a lot of evidence about what practices currently work for supporting young people with disability in their transition from educational training into employment, which is in big part due to the incredible work and programs that have been piloted already in this area. So there's a lot to learn from those that's come through. What we learned as well through the consultation process is that this knowledge about what works is not consistently being used across education, training, employment, and other relevant services or systems. So the commissioned research is looking for the bigger picture in terms of what needs to change so that that best practice is used. The recommendations that come out of the commissioned research should be looking at what is needed for NDIS service providers to consistently provide best practice supports, and what is needed for young NDIS participants themselves to be able to choose and access best practice supports. And as covered earlier, we are expecting that findings would be helpful for other government policy areas, such as education and training settings, and other systems such as employment. So you're examining system and service level barriers at a wide scale level. In terms of where the best practice comes from, it can be drawing from what has come out of best practice models and research pilots, things that have been completed already. And yeah, so really it does build on previous evidence, but it's not now creating more evidence about what works, because that's become quite well established. Does that address the concern, or would anyone like further clarification? Because if so, feel free to ask a follow-up question in the chat and we can cycle back to that. So in the meantime, the next question that came through was in terms of partnerships. So what does it mean for an organisation with expertise in this area who do not have background in academia? NDRP is very keen to see non-academic organisations who have relevant expertise being involved in the commissioned research. And so we have made it very clear in the guidelines that we expect any organisations who are listed as applicants to be actively considering how they can make sure they are using an inclusive and equitable governance and leadership approach, including requirements around shared IP ownership. So we are intentional in our decision not to use the terms lead organisation or project lead for the commissioned research. And the review panels will be assessing teams as a whole. So this means that any organisation, including non-academic organisations, can apply provided they meet the eligibility criteria outlined for organisations. And so the key focus for partnering is making sure that as a whole, your team can bring together the level of expertise and experience that the project will require as outlined in criterion 1. Hopefully that's addressed the question, but if anyone has any further clarification they need or more questions around that, please feel free again to post those in the chat. The third question received before today's event was asking if there are any initiatives for creating and embedding greater awareness within the public community. The disability spectrum is very broad and affects more people, or can happen to more people than people realise. For example, anyone at any stage of life can become disabled. And I was going to throw this one to Sue, who was keen to answer this one.
Sue speaking. And just to acknowledge that this is a broader question rather than focused on the commissioned research project, and welcome the question. So under Australia's disability strategy, there is an area that is addressing public sentiments and public attitudes towards disability, and it's also something that's flagged in our research agenda. So while this commissioned research project is not specifically addressing that question, it may well be part of it as you look at the 3 different opportunities. So I would encourage you to check out the research agenda and also look at Australia's disability strategy and some of the targeted action plans that are addressing this area. But thank you for the question.
Bethany speaking. So a fourth question that has come through was, can I focus on a narrower scope within an opportunity, such as a specific population? So as you'll have picked up from what I've shared earlier, the scope of the commissioned research project has already been narrowed through extensive consultation with people with disability, their representative organisation, government representatives and academics. So we are looking for proposals that consider the population group and the scope at a high level rather than on a subpopulation or narrow focus. As this is commissioned research, it is different from the NDRP funding rounds, which invite applicants to submit a proposal on an area of interest within a broader topic. Again, if you have further questions or comments around that one, that one, please let us know. I'll go through the questions I have here and then cycle back to those in the chat. So the fifth question that we had come through was, what are the research questions for the commissioned research? So the aims and scope for the commissioned research are part of the funding guidelines. And if it's helpful to see it reframed as a question, because we tended to just write the aims and scope in without turning it into research questions, what you can do is start to change that aim and scope into question format. So for example, instead of using statements, we can, end of page 10 on the guidelines, we can flip it to say what are the internal and external factors that may act as barriers or enablers for younger NDIS participants to make genuine and informed decisions about the transition to access and use of NDIS employment supports, and providers' ability or motivation to deliver best practice supports. So yes, if question format's helpful for you, just flip the scope and aims into questions, and the research questions are quite embedded in there. So yeah, they were all the questions that came through in advance. I can see there is one in the chat, and just give me a moment to read through and process it, because if I try and respond without reading properly, yeah, I will probably not give a sensible answer.
Sue speaking. Just while Bethany's looking at the question and ignoring me, I will just read out the question. And thank you, Jennifer, for your question. Should something like a systemic review of the evidence for different pilots and programs be part of the project? Or do you feel that this is already covered in the background preparation for this grant opportunity?
Bethany speaking. I think that is a really good question. And it's one that I might need to reflect back on and just check in, because the access we have to the background evidence, I just need to check how publicly available some of that is. But what we will do is we will update it in our frequently asked questions once I have an answer, and we'll make sure we let everyone who's attended today know when that's been updated. Yeah, sorry, it's not a very specific answer at this stage, but yeah, I just need to check what we've got access to versus the public has. Are there any other questions that people were hoping to ask this afternoon or morning if you're not in a Victorian, New South Wales in state?
Do you mind if I ask a question? Thank you. So I want to ask, when I was reading about the administered organizations, what happens if, let's say, the applicant is actually not with the organization at the moment? Is that technically the organization is themselves as a person, or do they need to be, let's say, with a uni or with a program to be able to apply for the commissioned research project?
Bethany speaking. I think the key applicant does need to meet the eligibility criteria. So I think I've got let me find the guidelines. So for example, you need to have the capacity to administer the grant to, where is it? Sorry, there is a lot of pages to these funding guidelines, and I'd rather be specific. So yeah, there needs to be things like an ABN. So we would be looking for ABN. You need to have access to or a clear pathway for things like ethics approval. So yeah, I think there are certain requirements that when we're administering funding do need to be met. Having said that, if there's an organisation you're connected with, they could, and yes, Sue's going to jump in and make this clearer.
Sue speaking. The situations that we've seen in the past where you end up in an auspicing relationship is where, say, you have a group of people who have an association or a network that is not necessarily have an ABN itself. They might be auspiced by another organization. That is a separate thing to possibly what you're asking, Cheryl, and I don't want to assume, but yes, there needs to be an ABN and a structure that can support contracting, ethics, payments, etc. And particularly as we're talking about and needing people with lived experience and people with disability to be in core roles and paid for their time and effort and access. So you will find, for example, when you start to get into the detailed budget for the project where you're outlining things like any Auslan, any other interpreting or access costs, engaging with those organisations, for example, requires an ABN to make a booking or to set up a payment process. So yeah, we would highly encourage any applicants to make sure they are directly associated with an organisation that can support that.
Perfect. Thank you, Sue. That was exactly what I was thinking about, because I know lots of people with lived experience of disability that may not be formally with an organization at the moment. And like you said, they come with a variety of support network. And you're basically saying, just make sure someone in your network actually has that capacity to help you do the more formal grant funding like criteria, like can help them meet that.
Sue speaking, and also is prepared to commit in writing to providing that support as well. So that should be part of the budgeting, or should be clear in the budgeting process, how that's going to work as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for that question, and thank you, Sue, for jumping in on that one. Anyone else have any questions they would like to ask? Feel free to use the chat or jump in and ask directly. I'm assuming not. Hang on. It's always hard. I can't see if people are writing in the chat, so you sort of wait. So how does the NDRP envisage the breakdown of the budget, given both the requirement for inclusive research and true co-design? I think this is very hard to speak to because it's going to look different for different project designs. We do expect to see, if a person with lived experience is involved, we would expect to see that budgeted for, whether that's as a co-design participant or whether that's as one of the applicants or one of the research team members. So we do expect to see that appropriately budgeted for. And we do have some really good advice. We've linked, if you have a look on the project website, we have linked to some resources that talk about partnering with organisation and paying people with disability. So yeah, definitely have a look at those resources that give some guidance around that. But in terms of your specific budget breakdown, it would look different even just across opportunities, because some projects may involve more regional remote areas, for example. Some are going to, opportunity 3, sorry, if you're engaging with complex communication needs, there'd be a higher amount put aside for accessibility. So I can't be prescriptive other than just to encourage you to, I guess, look at the key criterion. What are the key deliverables? What are the values and principles that we've really highlighted, and align your budget with those. Does that answer your question, or did you need some further clarity? Wonderful. I'll just give a couple of minutes just in case there's more questions. I know it takes time to sometimes get things into the chat. Also feel free to even just put your hand up to let us know that you've got a question, and that way we'll make sure we allow time until you've shared your question with us.
Sue speaking, just while people are contemplating, Bethany won't talk about the hard work that she's done, so I'll do it for her. So one of the great things about this project is that because it has been in production with the consultation process and with the co-design process, there is a lot of great information on our website about how to prepare as, you know, a good application. Check out our research agenda. And Bethany's done some great videos and some information that really takes you through what should be considered. So please, as a team, in preparing your application, check out those materials. There are almost all the possible questions responded to in that. So really helpful resources in there. And of course, the guidelines come in the different accessible formats as well. So please use those with your teams, your proposed teams, so that each person can be involved in making sure that your application speaks to their lived experience and their input, because you will be surprised about the depth and the breadth of the experience of people with disability in research projects and what they've seen work well, and what they know the NDRP is looking for.
Bethany speaking. So it looks like that might be it for questions today. So thank you to those who submitted or asked questions. And I think we've covered a lot of ground today. But if your question wasn't answered or you did have more, please don't hesitate to follow up with us after the session. We'll also share a summary of today's key points and resources to support your next steps. So definitely stay tuned. And yeah, thank you for staying with us as we approach the close of today's sessions. So to highlight some of the key messages and outline the next steps to support your journey with the NDRP. First, I guess what's hopefully come through very clearly is that co-design and co-production are at the heart of NDRP's research agenda. And by embedding these in principles, we aim to create research that is not only inclusive, but is also actionable and impactful. Second, our commissioned research funding focuses on the theme of transition of young NDIS participants from educational training to employment, which is a priority area that we identified through extensive consultation. It felt excessive at times, but no, I'm joking. That was just literally just a word stumble. And reflecting critical needs in the community. I'm going to take a moment to compose myself because Sue keeps laughing. I was so professional till that moment. And finally, we are looking for real-world impact. So this round is about systems change, not new programs, and projects must be disability-led and inclusive. So for your next steps, we encourage you to reflect on the ideas and insights shared today as you consider how your project might align with the NDRP's goals and the commissioned research topic. And if you haven't already, review the funding guidelines and prepare any additional questions for our upcoming drop-in sessions. As Sue has already mentioned, we do have a suite of resources and supports that will help guide you through the application process. The frequently asked questions is a very comprehensive list of answers to common questions. There's a set that's broad. I cover sort of most funding applications that we would get, so general questions. And then there's a list of specific questions that are specific to the commissioned research project. And we do keep updating that as we receive new questions. We do, update that. If you need additional information or you need materials in a different format, our team is here to help. So please don't hesitate to email the NDRP team at research@ndrp.org.au. So all of these resources, along with a recording of today's session, will be available on our website shortly. We've also got some new content coming, hopefully this week. and we'll send you a follow-up email with direct links. So thank you for joining us today. Your participation is a critical part of ensuring that NDRP's work remains grounded in collaboration, inclusivity, and real-world impact. Before we wrap up, we would love to hear your thoughts on today's session. We're always looking to improve how we support people, and your feedback helps us to refine our approach. So Sue's dropped, hopefully, a quick feedback link in the chat, and we'd really appreciate it if you could take a couple of minutes to share your insights. Sorry, I'm just wondering if the link's coming through. There we go. Awesome. So as we move forward, remember we're here to provide information and guidance, whether it's through these sessions, the resources we provide, or from our team. And we can't wait to see the innovative ideas and collaborations that will come out of this work. Together, we can build a research future that truly makes a difference for people with disability. So thank you again, and we hope to see you at our next event. Have a wonderful day.